Have you ever wondered why one of the most traditional families on earth, a family wrapped in centuries of protocol so rigid that even their breakfast routines are documented, would suddenly break their own rules for someone who came from a small island nation thousands of miles away? Why would the British royal family, known for choosing nannies from elite European academies, quietly bypass their own institutions and bring in a Filipina caregiver? And why, of all things, was this decision kept secret for months? What if I told you that inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, where silence is part of the architecture and footsteps echo like memories, something unusual happened? One cold December evening, a senior royal, someone whose face you have seen on television since childhood, stood alone in a private study, staring at a series of photographs. And in one of those photographs, taken in a small chapel courtyard in Cebu, a Filipino grandmother held a child who wasn't hers. No microphones, no palace walls, no royal duties, just a simple act of carrying another person's pain. It was that photo that made the royal pause. Something about the way the grandmother's hands held the child. Something about the calmness on her face. A calm that came from loving without expecting anything back. And in that moment, something unthinkable happened. The royal whispered a sentence no one expected to hear within the palace. "We need someone like her." This quiet moment would become the seed of a decision that would shock even the most senior advisors. No one said it out loud yet, but the idea floated there, fragile and brave. The palace needed a nanny, not a perfect nanny, not the best trained in textbooks. They needed someone who understood heart before duty, someone who carried compassion like an instinct, someone with the Filipino spirit. And far away in Manila, a woman who had no idea her life was about to change was finishing her shift. Her name was Marites Reyes, a 38-year-old caregiver who worked for a small family in Makati. The city was loud that night, the usual hum of jeepneys, horns, and the occasional laughter echoing from the street vendors. She folded tiny clothes on a small balcony, humming a church hymn her mother used to sing, and wishing she could go home to Iloilo for Christmas. But the budget was tight, and she needed to send money for her niece's medication. Like many Filipinos working abroad or in the city, she carried her family on her shoulders with quiet dignity. And then her phone rang. A foreign woman spoke on the line, her voice formal, yet strangely gentle. She said she was calling from an international placement agency. She asked if Marites would be open to a confidential childcare position abroad. Marites was confused. She wasn't looking for a new job. She wasn't sure if she qualified for anything grand. But the woman insisted the family needed someone with warmth, patience, kindness, and steadiness. The description felt strange, not technical, not demanding, almost emotional. When Marites agreed to hear more, she expected to learn it was in Hong Kong, Singapore, or Dubai. She had friends in all those places. But the woman paused for a long moment before saying, "The job is in the United Kingdom, and the child you will care for is someone important." Marites laughed nervously. Important. Did that mean the family was wealthy, politically powerful? The woman simply said more details would come soon. All Marites needed to know was that she was shortlisted because someone believed she had a rare quality. That night, Marites sat by the window of her small room. Manila glowed with lights and noise, yet somehow everything felt quieter than usual. She wondered why she had been chosen. She thought about her mother in Iloilo. She thought about her niece. She thought about how life sometimes opens doors without warning, without explanation. Something in her chest felt warm, like a whisper of purpose. The next morning, a silver envelope arrived at her employer's home. Inside were documents detailing her potential employment, a non-disclosure agreement, and a handwritten note with no signature. It contained only 9 words: "We seek not perfection. We seek the Filipino spirit." Marites read it again and again. Tears blurred the letters. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she realized that someone somewhere recognized the quiet strength she had carried all her life. The strength of every overseas Filipino worker she knew. The strength of her mother, her neighbors, her friends. A strength the world often overlooked. She signed the papers with trembling hands. At the airport a week later, her mother held her tight, whispering prayers. Her niece clung to her arm. Marites tried to smile, but her heart felt heavy and hopeful all at once. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side of the world. She only knew she had been chosen for something that defied logic. During the flight, she stared at the clouds and wondered about the child she would be caring for. Would they be kind? Would the family accept her? Would she make mistakes? Would she disappoint them? The sky outside looked endless, yet she felt small in her seat. Still, somewhere deep inside, there was a quiet voice telling her that she was walking into a story larger than herself. When the plane descended into London's cold grey skies, she pressed her forehead against the window and whispered, "Lord, guide me." She had no idea that in just a few hours she would walk through palace halls that had stood through wars, coronations, scandals, and triumphs. She did not know that her name would be spoken in rooms filled with portraits of kings and queens. She did not know that she, a Filipina from Iloilo, would touch the life of a royal child in ways no protocol had prepared them for. All she knew was that she had arrived in a world she never imagined entering, and the first step she took onto British soil felt like stepping into destiny. The air outside Heathrow felt colder than anything Marites had ever known. It wasn't the kind of cold that simply touched your skin. It felt like it slipped through your clothes and rested against your bones. She wrapped her thin jacket tighter as she scanned the crowd of travelers, unsure of who was coming to get her. For a moment, she felt like a small dot in a world far too large, far too unfamiliar. Then she saw a woman in a navy coat walking briskly toward her. The woman held a clipboard and wore a formal expression that seemed built from years of discipline. Her posture was perfectly straight, like someone who had practiced proper etiquette since childhood. "Miss Reyes?" she asked. Marites nodded. "I am Mrs. Harrow. I'll be escorting you." Her voice was crisp, polite, distant. At first, Marites felt intimidated, but something subtle happened when their eyes met. A brief pause, a tiny shift, a softness that appeared for half a breath, as if Mrs. Harrow realized she was not dealing with a typical hire. Whatever file she had read, whatever private instruction she had received, it had prepared her to expect someone who carried warmth. "Welcome to London," she added more gently this time. The ride from the airport felt long, yet everything outside the window fascinated Marites. She saw rows of brick houses, chimneys lined against fog, and people bundled in scarves. She noticed a mother adjusting her sleeping child's blanket on a bus stop bench. She saw two elderly men laughing under an umbrella too small for both of them. She noticed small details of human connection everywhere. It reminded her strangely of home. Mrs. Harrow spoke in small pieces. "The family values discretion. Your role is significant. You will be briefed further upon arrival." None of it made sense to Marites, but she nodded politely each time, too overwhelmed to ask questions. When the car turned a corner and she saw the palace gates, her breath caught. She had seen them only in pictures. She never imagined standing before them. The gates were tall, ornate, and guarded by soldiers who did not blink. The weight of history felt heavy in the air. But then, unexpectedly, one of the guards gave her a subtle nod, so small that she almost thought she imagined it. Inside, the palace corridors were warm but intimidating. Portraits of past monarchs lined the walls. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her with curiosity, as if wondering who this Filipino woman was and why she had been allowed inside their world. Marites kept her hands clasped tightly, afraid she might accidentally touch something she shouldn't. The carpets were thick, the ceilings impossibly high. Every few seconds, she caught herself whispering a quiet prayer. They stopped at a simple wooden door. "This," Mrs. Harrow said, "is the nursery." When the door opened, Marites expected grandeur. She expected gold trim and extravagant toys. Instead, the room was surprisingly gentle. Soft colors, warm lighting, a rocking chair near the window, and in the center of the room, a small child playing quietly with wooden blocks. He was younger than she expected, his hair soft and slightly curled, a look of deep concentration on his tiny face. He didn't look up when she entered, but something inside Marites tugged, a feeling she knew well. The instinct that rises in every Filipino caregiver when they see a child in need of comfort. She moved slowly, lowering herself to the floor without making a sound. She did not call his name. She didn't even know it yet. She just sat close enough for him to sense her presence. And after a long moment, the child paused. Without lifting his head, he shifted slightly toward her, like a sunflower turning toward light. That was the first moment, the first quiet acknowledgement, the first sign of connection. A royal advisor once said that young children often cry upon meeting new caregivers, especially those outside the royal routine. But this child simply looked up, blinked at her with calm curiosity, and then reached out his block, as if offering it to her. Mrs. Harrow's eyes widened. It was the smallest gesture, but for this palace it was remarkable. From there, the days unfolded slowly, full of small observations that changed the way Mariti saw this new world. She wasn't allowed into every room. She wasn't permitted near certain halls. But in the spaces she could enter, she noticed details that revealed more than any briefing could. The first moment happened in the hallway outside the library. She overheard two staff members whispering. "Why her?" one asked. "The family insisted," the other replied. "They said she brings something different." Different? Maritis wondered what that meant. Different like strange or different like good? She kept walking, pretending not to hear, but her heart tightened. Filipinos knew that word well. Many had heard it in foreign homes. Sometimes it meant admiration, sometimes prejudice, sometimes both. The second moment happened in the palace garden. It was early morning. Maritis carried the child on her hip as they walked past rows of roses, still wet from the night's mist. The gardener, an elderly man with kind eyes, approached them. He removed his gloves, smiled, and said, "You must be the new nanny." His tone wasn't skeptical, it was welcoming. Then he added something surprising. "I've seen many come and go, but the young prince, he only smiles like that when he feels safe." Maritis looked down at the child, resting his head on her shoulder. She hadn't realized he was smiling. That moment stayed with her. The third moment came unexpectedly. Late at night, after everyone had gone quiet, she heard footsteps outside the nursery. She opened the door slightly and saw a senior royal, one of the most well-known, standing there in silence, watching the sleeping child through the glass panel. Their eyes were tired, heavy, vulnerable in a way the world never got to see. When they noticed Maritis, they didn't speak at first. They simply looked at her with gratitude that didn't need words. Finally they whispered, "He rests better now." Thank you. It was such a small sentence. But it carried the weight of someone who had made a difficult decision and was relieved to see it was the right one. That night, when Maritis sat alone in her small room, she realized she had crossed an invisible threshold, not just into the palace, but into the heart of a family who seldom let outsiders in. She didn't fully understand it yet. But something was shifting, not just for her, but for the royal family itself. For weeks, the palace remained its usual mix of silence and protocol, but something within it had quietly begun to shift. It was subtle at first, almost invisible to those who walked its halls every day. But to her, who moved through the palace with eyes that noticed the smallest details, the change felt almost like a whisper turning into a quiet melody. The young prince, once known to be restless with caregivers, clung to her with an ease that surprised even the senior staff. He reached for her before anyone else. He fell asleep faster with her. He laughed, really laughed, with a kind of freedom that echoed in rooms built for formality, not joy. One afternoon, the moment that would change everything arrived without warning. It was raining heavily, the kind of British rain that fell in long, steady sheets. The prince had grown fussy, overwhelmed by the storm's rhythmic pounding. To soothe him, Maritis lifted him gently and began humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. A simple Filipino tune, soft and warm, sung countless times in countless Filipino homes. She swayed slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't realize someone was standing at the doorway, the senior royal, the one whose decision had broken protocol. They watched quietly, unmoving, almost reverently, and then something astonishing happened. In that dimly lit nursery, where portraits of former monarchs hung like silent witnesses, the senior royal's eyes grew wet. Not dramatically, not with the kind of tears one sheds in grief, but with the kind that appear only when something pure and unexpected touches the soul. Maritis froze when she noticed them. She immediately bowed her head, embarrassed, unsure if singing in her own language had crossed a line. She expected reprimand or at least a correction, but instead the royal spoke softly. Their voice quivered just enough to reveal emotion they had spent a lifetime hiding. So Maritis sang again, this time not just for the child, but for the parent who stood there listening. Her voice filled the room like gentle light, carrying memories of rice fields at sunset, church bells on Sunday mornings, the smell of adobo simmering in family kitchens. Every note carried the spirit of home, the Filipino spirit. When the lullaby ended, the prince had fallen asleep, his cheek resting peacefully against her shoulder. The royal stepped forward. "I have watched caregivers from the finest institutions," they said quietly. "Trained professionals, specialists, experts, but none of them have been able to give him this." They gestured to the sleeping child. "Peace," they whispered. Maritis felt her throat tighten. She did not know what to say. She had never been praised like this, not for something so simple, something that to her didn't feel like a skill at all. It felt like instinct, like love. The royal continued. "When I saw that photograph from Cebu, the grandmother holding the orphaned child, I felt something I could not explain. It reminded me that raising a child is not about perfection. It is about presence, warmth, devotion. I saw all of that in that one image." They looked at her with a sincerity that made her heart tremble. "And I see it in you." For a moment, the formality of the palace fell away. It wasn't a royal speaking to a nanny. It was a parent speaking to someone who had saved their child in a way no one else could. Then came the sentence, the one that would never be written in any public record, yet would stay with Maritis for the rest of her life. "You have given my child something no protocol can teach. You have given him a home." Those words felt holy. That night, alone in her room, Maritis sat on the edge of her bed, her hands covering her face as tears flowed freely. Happy tears, disbelieving tears, tears of someone who realized she had become more than a nanny. She had become part of the child's emotional foundation. But the true culmination of this journey came a few days later during a formal family gathering. Senior royals, advisors, and staff filled a grand hall decorated with chandeliers and centuries-old tapestries. Maritis had been instructed to bring the prince only when called, remaining unseen until needed. She waited outside the hall, holding the prince, who was growing restless from the noise inside. Instinctively, she whispered to him in Tagalog, bouncing him gently, the same way thousands of Filipino mothers soothe toddlers everywhere. The double doors opened. The royal advisor looked pale. "Bring him in," he said. "Now." Maritis entered cautiously. Conversations softened. Eyes shifted toward her, some curious, some skeptical, a few disapproving. After all, she was not supposed to be present in the room with so many high-ranking figures. But then, something extraordinary happened. The prince reached out his little hand, pointed to her face, and said loudly, clearly, with complete trust, "Nana." The hall fell silent. It wasn't just the word. It was the tone, the confidence, the affection. A royal child surrounded by privilege and protocol did not reach first for the parent, nor for the royal nanny formally assigned from Europe. He reached for her, for the Filipina, for Maritis. A prince born into a world of ceremony had chosen love over tradition. The senior royal, the parent, stood slowly, eyes softening in a way no one in that room had witnessed publicly. They walked toward Maritis, took the prince gently, and said in a voice that resonated through the hall, "This is the woman who has given him comfort. This is the woman who has earned his trust. And this is the woman we chose, because sometimes tradition must bow to the heart." Those words echoed like a quiet revolution. Advisors lowered their gaze, some nodded. Others simply stared, unsure how to respond. But it didn't matter. Something larger than tradition, larger than the palace walls, was unfolding. A Filipino nanny, humble, gentle, steady, had become the emotional anchor of a future member of the British royal family, not because she was trained in elite institutions, but because she carried something the palace could not manufacture, something deep, something warm, something innately Filipino. And though Marites did not know it yet, the decision to break protocol to choose her would soon influence something far beyond childcare. It would reshape the royal family's understanding of what kind of love builds strong, grounded children. The hall slowly returned to its quiet hum, but something had undeniably changed. Where once there had been skepticism, there was now a kind of stillness, as if everyone in that room was realizing that they had just witnessed a moment that would never make the newspapers, but would be remembered by those who saw it. A royal child had chosen without hesitation the Filipino Nanny, who held him with a gentleness no title, no pedigree, no tradition could replicate. After the gathering, as the palace corridors fell silent again, Marites walked back to the nursery, holding the prince close to her chest. She had attended the event as an invisible presence, someone meant to appear only when necessary. Yet she ended up becoming the center of the most tender moment of the night. And she carried that realization with a humility that made her steps careful and her breath steady. When she reached the nursery, she placed the prince gently in his crib, smoothing his blanket the way her mother used to smooth hers when she was a child. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock. She stood there longer than usual, her eyes lingering on his peaceful face. She wondered, how did a woman who grew up under the Cebu sun and Iloilo rains end up here? How did she become the trusted heart in a family that lived inside marble walls and royal protocol? But before she could sink too deep into her thoughts, she heard a soft knock behind her. The senior royal stepped into the nursery. This time, there was no distance between them, no formality, no invisible walls. Only two people who both cared deeply for the same child. They walked closer and looked down at the sleeping prince together. For a long moment no one spoke. The silence was not cold. It was warm, reflective, almost sacred. Finally the royal said, "When we hired you, many questioned our decision. There were people who believed tradition should never bend. But tonight proved something important." Their voice softened, not with weakness, but with conviction. Love cannot be regulated by protocol. Marites felt her heart swell. She had never imagined that she, a simple nanny, could cause a shift in the thinking of people who were born into power. The royal continued, "You have shown us something we had forgotten, something essential, that a child grows not by perfection but by connection. And that connection often comes from those who love not because of duty, but because it's who they are." They turned toward her with eyes that looked almost grateful. "I want you to know," they said, "that you have changed this family. Quietly, profoundly, irreversibly." Marites wanted to speak, but her voice stuck in her throat. Instead, she lowered her gaze in respect. She had never aimed to change anything. She only did what Filipinos anywhere in the world instinctively do, love with their whole being. The royal stepped back slightly, as if gathering courage to reveal something even deeper. "There is something I've never told you," they said. "When I first saw that photograph from the Philippines, I felt ashamed that someone with so little had given so much warmth, while we, with all our resources, all our titles, could not offer the same peace to our own child." The confession hung in the air like a rare truth. "And I realized," the royal whispered, "that perhaps it is not the grandest homes that raise the kindest children, but the people who carry kindness in their hearts." Marites felt tears forming again, not from sadness, but from recognition, from pride, from the realization that the world was finally seeing something she had always believed, that the heart of a Filipino caregiver is a gift no wealth can imitate. Later that week, something even more remarkable happened. The royal family held a private meeting, not public, not ceremonial, but intimate. And in that meeting, a new policy was quietly introduced. Not a formal protocol, but a shift in philosophy. From now on, they declared, The child's emotional well-being would be placed above tradition, above appearances, above expectations. And the one who had inspired this change was a Filipino nanny, whose name would never appear in official documents, yet whose influence would live within the family for generations. It wasn't the kind of legacy that came with medals or recognition. It was deeper than that. It was the legacy of shaping a child's spirit, one gentle moment at a time. One afternoon, weeks later, as winter slowly eased into early spring, the prince took his first steps. And he did not walk toward a toy. He did not walk toward a family member waiting to capture the moment. He walked toward Marites, laughing, stumbling, falling into her arms with complete trust. A photographer hired by the palace quietly captured the moment. The image would never be released publicly, but the royal kept it framed in their private quarters, a reminder of the day their child walked not toward tradition, but toward love. As the months passed, Marites found her place within the palace. Staff members who once looked at her with curiosity began offering warm smiles. The head chef sent her extra pastries. One of the palace guards taught her how to navigate the enormous grounds without getting lost. Even the chief advisor softened, occasionally greeting her with a nod that carried respect rather than mere obligation. She began writing home more often. Her mother would read the letters aloud to neighbors who gathered around with pride. Her niece, now healthier, kept a framed copy of the plane ticket that took her aunt to London. To them, Marites had become proof that even the quietest Filipinos could step into the grandest worlds and leave an imprint that mattered. But the final and most profound moment came one sunny morning. Marites was packing the prince's small bag for a day outing when the senior royal approached her with a sealed envelope. "This," they said, "is something we want you to have." Inside was a letter written on thick stationery, not typed, handwritten. The ink slightly uneven, the handwriting elegant yet personal. It read, "You have given our child a gift beyond measure. You have given him warmth, safety, and a foundation of love that will shape who he becomes. No crown, no title, no tradition has the power to give what you have given." Then the final lines. "You are not just his nanny. You are his home." Marites pressed the letter to her chest. Her tears fell freely now. She had never been called home before, not by someone of such status, not by someone whose world seemed so different from hers. Yet here they were, meeting at the same point, love for a child. In that moment, Marites understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. The world may measure importance by power, titles, or status, but a child measures it by heart. And when heart is the measure, the Filipino spirit shines brighter than any crown. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more stories that honor the Filipino.